Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate superstition. California is having really bad fires right now, and CNN has identified the culprit. It's Donald Trump. CNN says that the fires were caused because Donald Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords. People on the political left believe that atmospheric carbon dioxide causes bad weather and fires, and that only government treaties can stop it from happening. This graph shows atmospheric carbon dioxide levels measured at Mauna Loa, Hawaii since the year 1960. You can see how CO2 levels have been rising exponentially, which according to leftists means more and more bad weather. They believe that the planet is burning up because of man-made carbon dioxide. There's been 4 major government climate treaties: Montreal, Kyoto, Copenhagen, and Paris. As you can see, none of them have had any impact on atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, which have continued to rise exponentially regardless of what the government says they're doing. And you can also see that the lockdowns and lack of plane travel this year have also had no impact on atmospheric carbon dioxide. CO2 has continued to rise to record levels during the lockdown. But despite the fact that there's zero evidence to support their position, CNN is certain the fires were caused by Donald Trump. Now let's listen to what California Governor Gavin Newsom has to say about this.
A heat dome over the entire west coast of the United States when you have temperatures, record-breaking temperatures, record droughts, then you've got something else at play. And that's exactly what the scientists have been predicting for half a century. It is here now. California, folks, is America fast forward. What we're experiencing right here is coming to a community all across the United States of America unless we get our act together on climate change, unless we disabuse ourselves of all the BS that's being spewed by a very small group of people that have an ideological reason to advance the cause of a 19th century framework and solution. We're not going back to the 19th century. We're not apologists to that status quo. We believe in the fresh air of progress versus the stale air, emphasis, stale air, normalcy.
So the California governor says that scientists have been warning us about this global warming catastrophe for 50 years. Let's check that out. This is a little confusing because 50 years ago scientists were warning us about global cooling and a new ice age. It's almost like Governor Newsom doesn't know what he's talking about. Now let's listen to what else Governor Newsom has to say about the fires and the heat.
The new active fires that have come up over the course of the weekend, the El Dorado, getting a lot of attention because it's a reminder that the vast majority of fires that we experience on an annual basis come from individuals making bad decisions or by simple neglect and accident, meaning 90 plus percent of the fires that we experience in the state of California on an annual basis are man-made fires. It is not lost on anybody, particularly those that had to weather the weather over the course of this long holiday weekend, that we experienced yet another massive record-breaking heat wave over the last 3 days. Highest temperatures ever recorded, as an example, in Los Angeles County, 121 degrees. Death Valley, cool by historic standards. You recall Death Valley had 130-degree record, historic, arguably world record temperature a few weeks back.
In the first video, Governor Newsom blamed the fires on climate change. And then in the second video, he said that more than 90% of them were caused by careless humans. It isn't clear to me how climate change causes humans to accidentally start fires, but apparently it makes sense to Governor Newsom. Then the governor went on and claimed that 130 degrees this month in Death Valley was an all-time world's record, except that back in 1913, they had 3 days over 130 degrees, including 134 degrees on July 10, 1913. Once again, the governor is not telling the truth. And the governor claimed that 121 degrees in Los Angeles County was an all-time record, except that back in 1859, Los Angeles County reached 133 degrees, which was 12 degrees warmer than the warmest this year. According to the San Francisco Chronicle from June 13, 1877, page 2, the 17th, 18th, and 19th of June 1859, eastern parts of Los Angeles and Santa Barbara counties, the mercury rose in the shade to the startling figure of 133 degrees. Cattle full in the flesh perished in the fields, and birds dropped lifeless from the trees from the withering blast. And here's an article from 1859. The Santa Barbara, California Gazette on June 23rd says, Friday 17th of June will long be remembered by the inhabitants of Santa Barbara from the burning, blistering heat experienced that day, and the effects thereof. The sun rose like a ball of fire on that day, but though warm, no inconvenience was caused thereby until 2 p.m., when suddenly a blast of heated air swept through our streets, followed quickly by others, and shortly afterwards the atmosphere became so intensely heated that no human being could withstand its force. The effects of such intense and unparalleled heat was demonstrated by the death of calves, rabbits, etc. The trees were all blasted, and the fruit, such as pears and apples, literally roasted on the trees, where they fell to the ground. So California was hotter in both 1859 and 1913 than this year, when carbon dioxide levels were much lower. The heat is not caused by carbon dioxide, it's caused by downslope winds. In 1936, the Santa Cruz Gazette reported that forest fires occurrent in Santa Cruz Mountains for a century, seen as greatest peril to future prosperity, and it says that huge fires occur almost every year since at least 1868. It appears that Governor Newsom doesn't know much about the history of his own state. Governor Newsom doesn't seem to know much about science, and that seems to be a common problem with California politicians. Nancy Pelosi says Mother Earth is angry. She's telling us with hurricanes on the Gulf Coast and fires in California that this is all due to man's climate change. Apparently the California carbon tax and train to nowhere didn't solve their climate problems. Meanwhile, the Washington Post says that the world is going to end in 12 years. And the New York Times says it's time to panic about climate. Nancy Pelosi says that hurricanes are caused by global warming, but 4 years ago the Washington Post was terrified by a lack of hurricanes, which they also said was caused by global warming. And then 2018 was the first year on record with no violent tornadoes in the United States. This was probably also caused by climate change. But enough of the silliness, now let's look at some actual facts. Heat, drought, and fire is the normal climate of California. On December 1st, 1992, the New York Times reported this. Studying fire marks in giant sequoias, Thomas W. Swetnam and co-workers have discovered that major conflagrations sweeping across many mountain ranges in California and the Southwest were long a common feature, occurring at least twice a decade and apparently linked to oceanic currents much further south, the so-called La Nina events that often result in droughts. Finding this synchronicity in fire events was a big surprise to us, he said. It tells me that western landscapes in pre-settlement era were very smoky places. Not surprisingly, there's a La Nina event going on right now, and California is very smoky, so nothing has changed. This graph, without the annotations, was published by the San Jose Mercury News a few years ago, showing the history of droughts in California. They used to have 200-year-long droughts, which were considered to be natural. But Nancy Pelosi and Gavin Newsom believe that the current short drought was man-made. In 1994, the New York Times reported the same thing. Severe ancient droughts, a warning to California. Beginning about 1100 years ago, what is now California baked in two droughts, the first lasting 220 years and the second 140 years. Each was more intense than the mere 6-year dry spells that afflict modern California from time to time. Gavin Newsom claims science, but he doesn't know anything about science. His views are based on superstition. Now let's look at more recent history from the past century. This is the U.S. Forest Service graph of total burn acreage going back for 100 years. As you can see, there was a lot more burn acreage in the United States prior to 60 years ago than there is now. And in this graph, I've updated the 2020 data from the National Interagency Fire Center. You can see that burn acreage in the United States this year has not been anything unusual. In 1938, the New York Times reported that there was a forest fire once every 3 minutes in 1937, which burned almost 22 million acres. That's about 4 times as much as this year. And in 1995, when Bill Clinton was president, the U.S. government reported that in the conterminous United States during the pre-industrial period, when CO2 levels were very low, an average of 145 million acres burned annually. Today only 14 million acres are burned annually. So there was 10 times as much burn acreage in the United States when carbon dioxide levels were at pre-industrial levels. Now let's go back to 1970 again when Gavin Newsom said scientists were warning us about global warming. The New York Times was reporting that the US and Soviet were pressing studies of a colder Arctic. The United States and the Soviet Union are mounting large-scale investigations to determine why the Arctic climate is becoming more frigid, why parts of the Arctic sea ice have recently become ominously thicker, and whether the extent of that ice cover contributes to the onset of ice ages. And the New York Times reported that scientists wanted to stop the global cooling by sprinkling coal dust on the ice pack and thus melting it. Climate scientists are always coming up with such clever ideas. So the world was having a bad global cooling problem back in 1970. Let's look at what else was going on. Huge brush fires in California and a gigantic cyclone in East Pakistan. The Bola cyclone in 1970 was the deadliest on record. It killed more than 500,000 people. That global cooling is bad stuff. Now let's look at the 10 deadliest Atlantic hurricanes. 9 of them occurred when carbon dioxide levels were below 350 parts per million. And 3 of the 10 deadliest, including the deadliest, occurred during the Revolutionary War. The deadliest hurricane in U.S. history occurred in Galveston, Texas, this week in the year 1900. It killed more than 10,000 people and destroyed the city. And this week in 1910 was the largest fire in U.S. history. It burned 3 million acres in about 6 hours, which is about equal to the total burn acreage in California this year. It appears that Gavin Newsom and Nancy Pelosi don't know much about their country's history. Fire burn acreage has greatly decreased in the U.S. over the past century, and the number of hurricanes hitting the U.S. has also decreased since Abraham Lincoln was president. There's been a sharp decline, with the worst year being 1886. Nancy Pelosi said that the Gulf hurricane occurred because Mother Nature is angry at us. But in 1886, the Gulf was hit by 7 hurricanes. Texas was hit by 4, and Florida was hit by 3. One of the hurricanes wiped the city of Indianola, Texas, off the map permanently. Progressives have determined that fire and hurricanes are Donald Trump's fault. They've come quite a way since the 16th century when they blamed bad weather on witches. In the 16th century, there was a lot of bad weather, and people blamed witches and burned 15,000 of them at the stake. Superstitious anti-science people like Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi, and CNN have always believed that the climate is changing and that they live in the worst time ever. In 1871, the Brisbane Courier and Pall Mall Gazette had this article, "Imaginary Changes of Climate." A plentiful crop of speculation from weather prophets and projectors and half-instructed meteorologists and all the philosophic tribe of Laputa in general, to whom the periodical press now affords such fatal facilities. Every season is sure to be extraordinary, almost every month one of the driest or wettest or windiest, coldest or hottest ever known. Much observation which ought to correct a tendency to exaggerate seems in some minds to have rather a tendency to increase it. Toto thinks that Gavin Newsom has made a complete mess out of his state and that Democrats are simply trying to distract attention away from their malfeasance. Toto also thinks that Donald Trump doesn't control the weather. Toto's a very smart dog. You can visit him on the web at realclimatescience.com.